All right, after the Battle of Gonzales happened, the Texans are really excited. They've kicked the Mexican soldiers out from Gonzales, and they're excited because they want to kick more of those soldiers out. So men leave from Gonzales, and they start going towards Goliad, where they know General Cos is located. General Cos, there's something very special about General Cos. He is Santa Anna's brother-in-law. Okay? He's married to Santa Anna's sister. So he doesn't get his job because he's the greatest general ever or the greatest lieutenant or anything. He gets it because he's sort of related to Santa Anna. So Santa Anna puts him at a remote outpost in Texas because he feels like any idiot can do this job. So he puts him out there at Goliad at the Presidio La Bahia. Well, General Cos is there with 50 of his own men. Well, when the men from Gonzales arrive to Goliad, they find out that General Cos had left for San Antonio just about 4 days earlier, and he left only 50 men to defend the Presidio La Bahia. So you've got men under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Francisco Sandoval. The Texans quickly attack. Once again, this is a surprise attack. The Mexican soldiers had no idea this was coming. The battle's over in less than half an hour. Okay, so the Texan forces, once again, it's a surprise attack. They really only have 1 or 2 people that are wounded during the battle, but the Mexican forces lose a few more. They ended up having 21 surrender and 20 escape during this time period. The Texans take over the Presidio La Bahia. They have control of Goliad. And you're going to see Colonel James Fannin gets to be the person in control of Presidio La Bahia. Once again, this is another man that he really isn't that good of a military leader, kind of like General Cos, because this is a far outpost. So we're going to talk more about Fannin later on. At the same time that all of this is happening, the consultation is going on. We've already talked about the consultation before. We talked about where it was originally supposed to happen at Washington on the Brazos, but they decided that they needed a printing press, so they move it to the city of San Felipe de Austin. This is where Stephen F. Austin shows up to the meeting and he switches sides. Okay, during this time period, you have a lot of people coming to Texas. We talked previously about the filibusters that came to Texas, how these people were escaping things like debt, they were escaping the law, and there were some people who were up in high positions of power, like Sam Houston, who left from Tennessee. He was the governor of Tennessee, and he comes to Texas because he was a bit of a disgrace at the point in his life in Tennessee. He was a drunkard. He had married a young bride. That didn't work out so well, and he lost the trust of the people that he was serving in Tennessee. One of the great things about Sam Houston was he lived with a Cherokee for a while, so he had a great relationship with the Native Americans. He spoke Cherokee. So this man decides at one point in 1835 that, you know what, it's time to start fresh, and he comes to Texas, where he's immediately put into this discussion on whether to go to war or whether to remain at peace. Well, during this discussion at the consultation, they decide to give Sam Houston the command of the regular army. The regular army are those people who have military training. They already have training. He's going to recruit more people as time moves on. The picture that you see right here on the left is in honor of Sam Houston. This is in Huntsville, Texas, where Sam Houston makes his home with his wife and kids later on in life, and they commemorate him because he's such a large figure to Texas history. There's going to be a second video, or maybe 2 videos about Sam Houston that go a little more in depth about him and his travels to Texas. Now, Stephen F. Austin was also at the consultation, and during this time at the consultation, he's elected as commander of the Volunteer Army. Stephen F. Austin doesn't have any military experience, but he's very passionate about what's going on, which makes him the perfect person to run the Volunteer Army, those people who don't have military experience. We already talked previously before about him being called the father of Texas because he's the first one to bring those settlers to Texas, the first 300, the old 300. But he also does a lot during and immediately after the Texas Revolution. He's the guy that everybody looks to for advice on what to do. He's going to die a little bit after the Texas Revolution. It's going to have nothing to do with the revolution. He's actually going to die from, I think it's pneumonia. So he actually is a huge part of the revolution because he is the leader of the volunteers. But other than that, he doesn't play a huge role in the revolution. Here we go. Okay, so Santa Anna. Let's talk a little bit about Santa Anna. Santa Anna appoints himself as dictator. Remember, we talked previously before about how Santa Anna comes to power as a federalist, quickly decides that doesn't work for him, so he becomes a centralist. He tries to rein all the power to the central government, and then because he's got the military backing, he becomes a dictator. That's how you become a dictator. You have the military supporting you, so you can do whatever you want because you have that firepower. He believed that the arrival of immigrants to Texas was part of a plot by the United States to take over Texas. They're very wary about this. They have been wary about this for a long time. Santa Anna is very arrogant. He believes the Mexican army is unbeatable. He calls himself the Napoleon of the West. He thinks he's this great military leader, this great strategist. And you're going to see that the Texans are going to notice that, and they're going to use that against him later on. Okay, so this all happened in October and November of 1835. There are these little bitty small victories, but now the Texans are ready for a little bit more. They've kicked 2 sets of Mexican troops out of Texas. They're getting restless. They want to kick the rest out. They hear that there's a Mexican cavalry and a mule train heading towards the town of San Antonio. The Texans think, okay, this has to be silver to pay for the troops that are stationed in San Antonio with costs. So the Texans say, you know what, we need that silver. We need it so that we can buy weapons, so we can pay our own soldiers. We need that. So they try to intercept this mule train, which these mules are walking, and they're covered with things on their back with a burlap cover, so you can't really see what's underneath. They just assume that it's silver. Well, they capture these mules. They go, they attack, they capture them, and they discover really all they found underneath the burlap was a bunch of fresh cut grass to to feed the cavalry's horses in San Antonio. It wasn't silver, it's just grass to feed the horses. There's very little action that happens right after this point because we're heading towards San Antonio, towards General Cost and his men at San Antonio. They've got to come up with a plan so that they can kick the Santa Anna soldiers out of Texas. Okay, on the bottom of your packet, you're going to be creating a newspaper article that might have been written just after the grass fight happened. Think about what would have been written in a newspaper if you were to read about this incident. Make sure it's 5 to 7 sentences in length, and you should include a catchy headline. Be creative with your writing. Ben Milam was a 47-year-old impresario that helps with the capture of Goliad. It also helps gather up volunteers to follow him to San Antonio so that they can attack the Alamo and get control of that and kick General Cost and his soldiers out of Texas as well. His famous plea during this time period to people was, who will go with old Ben Milam into San Antonio? As Ben Milam and his men reach San Antonio, they perform a siege. They sit for several days surrounding the Alamo, waiting for the Mexican troops to surrender. As fighting begins on December 5th, Ben Milam is killed on the 3rd day, and the fighting goes all the way to December 9th. General Cost and his troops retreat to the Alamo, where they later ask to surrender on the terms of the Texan soldiers on the 9th of December. General Cost and his soldiers are allowed to return to Mexico because really all the Texans wanted during this time was to get the Mexican soldiers out of Texas. They promised they will never come back to Texas and fight again, and that they will fight to get the Constitution of 1824 back. Now, as the Texans got General Cost to surrender, the Texans get word later on that Santa Anna will be marching towards them. But they figure, well, that won't be for a long time because it's going to be during the winter. They're going to want to gather up troops. They're going to want to make sure that the walk all the way from Mexico City and Coahuila is going to be a little easier. So they're going to wait, and it's not going to be until probably late March or April before Santa Anna gets there. You're going to have some men travel towards the Alamo to make it stronger, and these are usually going to be your single men that have nothing else going on. But your married men with families are going to go home to their families during the winter time. One of the men that comes to the Alamo is Jim Bowie. He's known for carrying the knife called the Bowie knife. He designs this knife. He arrives January 19th with 30 other men to the Alamo. You'll find that attached to one of the videos that are in addition to this, there is information about Jim Bowie and how he came to Texas. Davy Crockett is another man that arrives at the Alamo. Davy Crockett was one of those men that was larger than life during this time period. He had many plays written about him. Everybody knew the myth surrounding Davy Crockett. Well, when his bid for senator doesn't go like he plans, Davy Crockett goes to Texas. He volunteers his time at the Alamo along with the rest of his friends. William B. Travis arrives at the Alamo February 3rd, 1836. William B. Travis, we've talked about him previously. He's a 19th century lawyer. He was a soldier, and he's going to command the regular army at the Alamo since Sam Houston is not able to be there. Sam Houston is in other parts of the state, of the country, to try and gather up people. So William B. Travis is in charge. He has to share this power, though, of the different soldiers at the Alamo with Jim Bowie, who's in charge of the volunteers of the Alamo. Travis is going to be the man that writes the now famous letter from the Alamo addressed to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. He's going to be the one that is going to try and gather as many people to help them at the Alamo later on as possible.